Why hello there, and welcome back to another video from me, Demajen, at Demajen Gaming. For the last few years now, I've organised a list, sometimes public, sometimes not, of my top 10 games played during that year. Sometimes they were games that weren't necessarily out or released in that particular year, but games that I very much enjoyed playing during the year. But most of the time it was, or at least I tried to remain, focused on games that were actually released in that year. And I even put a couple of them together as videos. I did one way back in 2011. It was the first video I ever made, and it hasn't aged well. And I did a video last year for 2018, which garnered a handful of views and a few likes and agreements. This year, though, I'm doing something a little bit different, because this year, having played games mostly for YouTube all year, and for my own enjoyment, of course, but recorded a lot of them for YouTube, I've played quite a few different kinds of games. So rather than try and organise them into a arbitrary top 10 list where there would undoubtedly be some decisions that I just couldn't feel like I could make, I've decided to do an arbitrary awards list instead. Makes no real difference overall. It's just giving me an opportunity to say which games I liked this year, and to heap some praise onto developers, companies that I think did a good job. So the categories that you can experience and explore, and there'll be timestamps for these up on the screen now. We'll start off with the best fidelity visuals. So the games that look the best, maybe the most realistic looking games. And we'll follow that up with the best stylized visuals, because not every game needs to be pushing the envelope in terms of graphical fidelity. Sometimes an art style can carry your game. So those are the two visual ones, best fidelity and best stylized. We're going to follow it up with the gameplay experience categories. We're going to start off with the best combat in a video game that I played this year, and follow that up with the best exploration, because combat and exploration are the two pillars that I rate most of my gaming experiences on. And finally, we're going to finish off with something that is very, very subjective. We are going to have the categories for best story, which as a writer obviously is of considerable importance to me. And we're going to round off this very arbitrary award show with best music, because story and music are both things that I remember long after the actual mechanics of a game have faded from my memory. So that's what you've got to look forward to coming up. As I said, timestamps will be on the screen and in the description below, so that you can check these out at your leisure and in whichever order you want. So let's get cracking. We're going to start off with best fidelity visuals. I would be lying if I said that visual fidelity was unimportant to me. Looking back at a lot of old games, it becomes quickly very apparent to me that I will struggle to enjoy it just because of how the game looks and controls. We've made a lot of progress since gaming first came about, and a nice showpiece game with modern technology does go a long way to helping my immersion, and all four of the nominations in this category do excellent jobs at showcasing certain types of visual fidelity. Control from Remedy opened my eyes to the powers of ray tracing when I could get it to work, while Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order delighted me with a huge range of backdrops and sweeping vistas that I did stop and stare at during the course of my many hours of exploration. Anthem did quite well at the start of the year in terms of visual fidelity. It's kind of a shame that the combat and longevity of the game and its technical flaws didn't balance these things out. The winner of this category, however, is the Resident Evil 2 remake. The visual fidelity of that game really added for me to the necessary atmosphere and ambience of the title, making this particularly scaredy man very much get creeped out by the scary game. I'm not sure I praised Resi 2 enough for its graphical style and its fidelity in my playthrough, probably because everything was making me go, ew. But arguably that's praise in its own right, in my opinion. And on the subject of Resident Evil, did you see that the Resident Evil 3 remake is being released next year? Leave a comment down below with your thoughts on that, especially the redesign of Jill Valentine, who remains one of my favourite characters from the franchise. Do you like what they have done with her redesign? So there we go. Best fidelity visuals. Obviously, I didn't play many games this year that were really graphical powerhouses in this sense. So, not a huge number of titles for me to pick from. However, the rather disturbing, glistening nature of Resi 2 was very much enough to pick up this award from me. We'll move on now to the best stylized visuals, or you could argue the best aesthetic visuals. Because perhaps more than visual fidelity, a distinctive aesthetic style choice goes a long way to making a game that, for me, ages well. And all of the games in this category have their own art style, and very distinctive art style at that. We've got the very graphic novel heavy and inspired Darksiders Genesis, with its character portraits and its slightly over the top proportions for the antagonists and protagonists. We've got the grim religious pixel art of Blasphemous, which is an excellent game to look at for how to do pixel art well. I was especially fond in Blasphemous of the enemy design. They did a lot with very little pixels to make the enemies particularly disturbing, and I was especially fond of the women that carry the giant crucifixes on their back. I thought they were particularly well designed. We've also got the Playmobil / Claymation inspired remake of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and it probably won't come as a surprise to anybody that Link's Awakening features elsewhere on my list. I've got a massive nostalgia boner for Link's Awakening, it being the first video game that really helped me connect with games as a medium for storytelling. And the art style of it, although not technically very proficient at times due to the Switch's hardware, the actual art style, the aesthetic of it, I think, was really well suited to that game and its purpose and the remake of it. All of the games that I've just mentioned will look just as good in 10 years' time because they haven't gone for the super photorealistic visual fidelity. They've gone for style, and style lasts longer. However, the winner of this category for me, as many of you will probably have expected, is Trine 4. It remains the game that I have taken the most screenshots of, over 50 screenshots this year, and not just for the purpose of creating video thumbnails. I've had several of them revolving as desktop backgrounds for a while now. Keeping in mind, of course, that I, as a hobby, play video games and record them on YouTube. So if I want to go back and, look at something just for the sake of gameplay or experience, I've got all those videos that I can go and look back. But if I want something to make my desktop look pretty, then Trine 4 has done a real service for me in that regard. It is a visually distinctive, gorgeous fairy tale experience. The Trine series has always had these amazing fairy tale graphics, and Trine 4 is no exception. It's got brilliant uses of very vibrant lighting and a rather ridiculous amount of detail in its backgrounds. So it's right up there at the top this year in terms of stylized visuals. We move on now to the 2 gameplay categories, starting us off with Best Combat. Now, this is what forms the meat of a satisfying moment-to-moment gaming experience for me. Graphics will remain with me for a while, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is what counts when I'm actually sat down playing a game. And all 4 of the games on this list have enjoyable combat, but the winner is clear. Control has some very interesting gunplay and psychic power combat mechanics, which I really enjoyed playing around with and discovering, especially the little graphical effects that go with them, although it wasn't necessarily easy to control them at certain points in time. Darksiders Genesis has very fluid hack and slash gameplay with character switching, so you can play the very melee focused War, or you can play the very ranged focused Strife, giving you a lot of flexibility to play around for your own personal style, and it's great fun in co-op as well. Surprising possibly to some people might be the inclusion of the Surge 2 on this list as a quote-unquote Dark Souls clone, which it kind of is, or I don't like the term clone, is what it boils down to. Surge 2 has got a really, in my opinion, excellent directional parrying system. It's one of 2 games this year that I felt have really done parrying well. And the directional parrying system does make the game a lot of fun once you get to grips with it. However, that expertise does make the challenge of the game suffer. It comes at the expense of a lot of the challenge of the game. Sekiro, on the other hand, is the clear winner in this category because it is hard to learn and even more difficult to master. It tops the list of the most challenging and satisfying combat in any video game I've played, I think. Though it only features in one other category in these awards, so it doesn't really come close to topping Bloodborne in all other aspects. I'd very much like to see the combat in Sekiro expanded on to include other weapons and styles in further games from FromSoft, because I really did enjoy the combat in Sekiro, but it was lacking in other areas. So Sekiro, best combat, fairly closely followed, in my opinion, by Surge 2. And if I am honest, I did struggle to decide which of the 2 I would put at the top, because realistically, I feel like I enjoyed the Surge 2 more. But I'm also aware of the fact that I enjoyed it more because it was a good chunk easier than Sekiro's. And the timing and nature of Sekiro's combat was overall a more difficult to get to grips with experience, and I like the challenge of that. The other gameplay category is, of course, exploration. I am a huge fan of Metroidvania/Metroid style games, so it's no surprise that once again I played a lot of games with an exploration focus this year. Sekiro is on this list. It's a game with some interesting environments, lots of nooks and crannies, hiding secrets or bosses, as is the want of a Souls-like title, but it's not great exploration-wise in comparison to the others on this list. Blasphemous has Metroidvania elements, quite a lot of them actually, but many of them are rather optional, which was an interesting choice in my opinion. It's worth hunting them down for a more rounded gaming experience, but their inclusion as optional was a bit of an odd choice. Still a great game for exploration though, and one I do highly recommend. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is very much a proper Metroidvania or an Igavania title, and it's got a lot of, therefore, proper Metroidvania exploration to do, some of which kept me quite busy. But again, there was just something that didn't quite mesh right for the feel of the exploration in that game. It was a little bit too predictable, one might argue. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order was a game with some really excellent exploration, tied in, of course, to the visual fidelity from earlier. And it had some really kind of fun but janky lightsaber combat thrown in as well. However, while the exploration was great, the actual rewards from that exploration didn't always feel particularly worth it, which is a shame. I do applaud them for not having any microtransactions and having all the cosmetics findable, but I don't know, it didn't feel quite right. So really, this is probably the closest of all of the categories when it comes to offering some kind of award. But I do have to say that the most recent game that I've played, Darksiders Genesis, has probably the most fun and rewarding exploration of all the games that I've played this year. But not without critique. I mean, it certainly has its map issues, the actual map itself, because of how the map art and the game world aren't actually linked. There are some bugs that prevent things, being ticked off on the map, and there's no way of actually showing the player characters or characters' locations on the map because they are physically and code-wise separate. But getting around them is great, and there are a lot of things to find, to try and reach, and the fact that you can go back and explore them again with abilities that you get in later missions. It's a proper kind of Metroid or Legend of Zelda feel. And that's what's always made the Darksiders games fun for me. Even Darksiders 3, which had less of that than I think a lot of people would like. In fact, there are a lot of things that even now, at least at the time I was writing this script, I don't have a clue how to get to. There's a few puzzles that when I was writing the script, that I hadn't got. And that was after 30 hours played. Now that I'm actually recording this video, which is, I've got 34, almost 35 hours, I have actually managed eventually to complete some of those puzzles. And I've already put videos up on the Leviathan's Landing and the Gauntlet. But they took me a while to really figure out. All of the games on this list have got great worlds to explore with really distinctive looks and styles to them. But I think Darksiders Genesis has the most distinctive environments for each of its different missions, and there's other things that kind of tip that into the top bracket as well. So it takes top place on this list. And finally, we come to the two most subjective categories on this particular list. I mean, they're all subjective. That's the whole point of lists like this. But these two in particular are going to have some very subjective things going on. First of all, we'll look at best story. As many of you know, I am an English teacher and a writer with published works, so story is my jam. I might like Metroidvanias, which don't tend to be games well known for their stories, but a good story will trump gameplay for me every single step of the way. And if you've followed my channel for any length of time, you know, just looking at what's on the screen now, you know what's winning this one. But we'll go through the motions anyway. Anyway, we'll go through the motions anyway. Control, The Surge 2, and Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order get considerable props from me for trying to tell coherent single-player narratives set in a variety of settings with varying degrees of success. Control, I think, comes off best out of those three. I think some of it is due to its ties to Alan Wake as one of my favourite game franchises, but also my own love of the subject matter in question. You might think that The Surge 2 is a rather odd inclusion on this list, considering it's in some ways a little bit story light as a Souls-like experience, but I did like the constant little memory flashbacks tying things together, and I particularly appreciated the extra section at the start of New Game Plus. I thought that was a really cool little twist and feature, and I certainly didn't expect that. Again, if you've watched my New Game Plus video from The Surge 2, you'll have seen my reaction to that and how surprised I was for the better. Jedi Fallen Order had quite a few decent story beats and a couple of twists, but nothing particularly major. You could argue that it's typical Star Wars fare, but it was well paced, it was well acted, it was a nice story, nothing revolutionary, but fairly well told nonetheless. It comes down then to the other two games on this list, and Darksiders Genesis I have to give considerable kudos to for becoming, in my opinion, probably the best game in the franchise as far as story purposes are concerned. It was funny, it's dark at times, and in some cases it is rather surprising or shocking or emotional. There are some emotional beats and moments in there. The stuff with the starter, the stuff with the thing that Strife finds at Bastion's Fall, just adding those little moments. The relationship between and the banter between Strife and War, as well as their interactions with the other characters, Vulgrim, Samael, and spoilers, all add up to a very well-paced and plotted narrative. And those interactions allow a sense of purpose and weight and gravitas and fill out the story of the franchise so much better. And it does have, and it does reap the benefits of being part of a franchise in that regard when it comes to telling story. But nowhere near as much, of course, as Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers is concerned. I mean, holy shit, what a storytelling tour de force the Shadowbringers expansion was. And it's an MMO. MMOs are not, I mean, you just look at World of Warcraft. I mean, I like what they tried to do with Battle for Azeroth, but telling stories in MMOs is difficult. I made a snap judgment a few months ago now about Shadowbringers and my thoughts on it. And I think I said at the time that Shadowbringers has now become my favourite Final Fantasy storyline out of all of the games. And, you know, I have played all of them. The numbered ones, anyway. I still haven't played Tactics. And I was thinking to myself, oh, that's probably just a snap judgment based on how you're feeling right now. It's been months, and it still stands. Thinking back to that story, even now, is getting me emotional. And that's just bizarre. It's an MMO. It's tab targeting. It's clunky. But the story was just amazing. Excellent character and world building. A fleshed out, sympathetic antagonist. And some utterly heartbreaking moments and revelations scattered throughout. If you haven't watched my series on the Shadowbringers MSQ, my narrative experience, I do urge you to go check it out, or better yet, play it for yourself, because I strongly feel that, you know, it has the best storyline of video game that I've played in a good long while. And remember that they once lived. And finally, to close out these Arbitrary Video Game Awards for 2019, we come to Best Music. Now, I am not a professional musician. I do have a background in music, but it is very much in the background these days. I don't study music. I don't really follow a lot of music except the stuff that I play in video games and the occasional symphonic metal band, but let's not go into that. A good soundtrack has a massive impact on me as a gamer. The impact of it cannot be denied. I carry the memories, the emotional resonances of scenes with me long after the game has been completed and shelved. Every soundtrack on this list, and there are lots of them, I think 6 is the most out of any category that I've looked at. Every soundtrack on this list is frankly excellent. The Valfaris OST, whilst I didn't necessarily like the game as much as I'd hoped, the actual soundtrack, the headbanging metal of it is excellent. I don't even know how to describe the genre of the Surge 2. Electronic, techno, urban, I haven't got a clue. I'm not big into musical genres, but it really suited and fitted the rather dystopian, futuristic science fiction Souls-like experience. The orchestral pieces of Control were excellent, and I do have the soundtrack to Control just because I really enjoyed playing the game and the pieces of music that were attached to it. But I would, of course, be utterly remiss if I didn't once more reiterate my love for Remedy's use of Poach the Falls songs. The Ashtray Maze sequence in Control remains a standout among all of the games that I played this year for its use of music and tying into narrative. Gareth Coker did the music work for Darksiders Genesis, and there are some utterly brilliant and evocative pieces on that soundtrack to go with the levels and the boss fights in the game that made exploring the landscapes and dungeons a thrill. I've been a fan of Coker for a while, ever since In Momentum actually, which was a game that I don't think a huge number of people played, but of course it was all in the Blind Forest that truly brought Coker into the foreground for video game musical scores, and Genesis has made excellent use of his talents, taking familiar themes and motifs from Darksiders games of the past, adding layers of texture and nuance to them throughout. And I particularly like the multiple variations on the puzzle solved / secret found jingle from the previous games. It was especially good because there were quite a lot of those jingles in this game, and it was nice to not have to hear. It was nice not to have to hear the same one each time. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening obviously is going to be on this list. As I mentioned in my playthrough of that, it was the game that tied together music for me with video games and the emotional resonances that they could have. And Link's Awakening has got some fabulous orchestrations and orchestrated versions of the original Game Boy tunes. I don't think there's a single piece of music in the remake that hasn't been improved upon in some way, but the standouts are, of course, the Face Shrine, the Windfish's Egg, and, of course, the now fully orchestrated version of Ballad of the Windfish. I'm, of course, trying not to think about the Ghost House theme, because it'll probably make me tear up again. Yep, there I go. Damn it. Nostalgia. Unchanged. Winning this category is, of course, Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. As you might expect, Soken once more knocks the music out of the park into another galaxy. Throughout the Final Fantasy XIV expansion experience, there's brilliant pieces every single step of this rather tragic journey. There's a new rock battle theme. There's the several kind of mellow versions of the theme. The Crystarium at Night is a particular favourite. Shadowbringers runs the gamut of musical styles and depths. As far as emotional depth goes, however, you can't beat the climactic orchestration of the Dying Gas second phase music, or for me at least, the emotional resonance of Soken's retelling of Uematsu's classic Forge Away from Final Fantasy VIII, which is used in the Eden Raid. And again, my reaction to that, because I hadn't heard the piece of music, my reaction to that is documented on YouTube, which is the reason why I started this YouTube channel, seeing my reactions and recording them for posterity. Final Fantasy games have always been about epic stories entwined with epic music, and 14's latest expansion continues setting that bar ridiculously high. There is one other category which I'd like to be able to do an award for, but just because of how my gaming experiences have been this year, there's not exactly a whole number of candidates for it. I've tried to keep this list to games that were released this year, and that category is best multiplayer game or best multiplayer for social gaming. I do play a lot of games cooperatively for social purposes with my friends because I don't get to see them in the flesh all that often. But we tend to keep on coming back to Overwatch, and obviously Overwatch is a frustrating mess of a game, but also it's not a game that's released this year. So realistically, the only games that I've played in co-op or multiplayer that were released this year are Remnants from the Ashes or Darksiders Genesis, and I've not really played a lot of Darksiders Genesis in co-op. Did a couple of levels. So it's basically Remnant from the Ashes on its own. And I do feel, that being said, that Remnant does deserve some praise. I really enjoyed playing Remnant from the Ashes, and I'm continuing to do so. I'm literally playing it right now with my mates. I'm up to, what, 71 hours played with that game. And a good probably 6 or 7 of those have been in co-op with my best friend, and we've been really enjoying it. You know, considering the first 60 or so hours, I didn't play co-op at all. I played on my own. It's an experience that I think scales quite well, and that we've really liked the challenge of. It's not super frustrating. It's just a nice, in my opinion, fairly balanced and entertaining challenge, but I'm sure a lot of people disagree. So whilst there is no real category for multiplayer or co-op gaming, just because that's not generally my focus in games, I feel like if I was going to give a multiplayer or social gaming award, it would be for Remnant from the Ashes, just because I want to acknowledge the work that Gunfire Games did on it, and I just really like the game. The only other game that I've bought this year that does have a multiplayer component was Borderlands 3. But I didn't play that in multiplayer. Likewise, I didn't play Trine 4 in multiplayer. And obviously, Shadowbringers is an MMO, but I didn't play that with friends. I played that with randoms for the most part. For the most part. There was one dungeon I think I did with one of my mates. / viewers. So there we go, folks. Those are my Arbitrary Video Game Awards for 2019. It's a very personal list. It's a very subjective list. And it is only based on games that I played and could think of when it came to actually writing the script for this. Your opinions will differ, might differ, almost certainly do differ. If you have your own list of games or your own winners for the categories that I've suggested, leave them down in the comments below. If you don't agree with what I said, that's fine. You know, you can drop a dislike on the video if you like. But that's not really what the dislike button's for. Just tell me why I'm wrong down in the comments below instead. I'm always interested in seeing what other people's opinions are of these kinds of things. I know Anthem was a bit of a controversial, probably, decision to put on this list. I imagine Control also was. But I can't imagine, actually, some of the others people will have too much to gripe about. Keep in mind that some of the big games of this year, games like Red Dead Redemption 2, I haven't played and have very little interest in. Because they're big open world games, and I just don't have the time to really focus on those kinds of things. Likewise, Death Stranding, I know it's been a big popular game this year, but I've got to admit, I watched the first 2.5 hours or so of Death Stranding, and I thought it looked boring, so I didn't pick it up. I mean, I'm sure it gets better later. I know a lot of people have really enjoyed Death Stranding, but I might grab it at a discount when it's in like a deep sale or something. Either way, folks, thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you very much for supporting my channel this year. I am, if I'm honest, not entirely sure why you have done so, but I do appreciate the support, the comments, the discussions that I've had down below these videos, which at the end of the day really are just for me to record my silly face and silly reactions to things, so that I can look back and see how I reacted to games that I've enjoyed, because of course I couldn't do that, and because I didn't do that for my two favourite games, Hollow Knight and Bloodborne. 2019 is almost over. By the time this video comes out, by the time you watch this video, it might well be over. 2020 and the Roaring Twenties has a lot of good stuff coming up. Ori and the Blind Forest 2, or Ori and the Will of the Wisps as it's properly known. Hollow Knight Silk Song, two massively anticipated games for me coming hopefully in the new year. So please look forward to those. There'll be more Final Fantasy XIV content coming next year. Probably some more Darksiders stuff, depending on what happens there. Warcraft 3 Reforged will be coming at some point. More World of Warcraft content when they release their next expansion next year. Diablo 4, Path of Exile 2. All of these things I'm interested in taking a look at, taking a gander at. Some of the games that I've tried this year have been demos or one-shots or early access. There's a playlist of those. Again, some of those will be probably releasing in 2020, so I'll be covering those more fully at release. All in all, there's a lot of stuff to look forward to in 2020, and I'd just like to thank you all if you come along for that journey with me. Thank you very much for watching this video. Have a great new year. And until next time, doodle pip. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, why not click the like button and consider subscribing. Remember, you can ring the bell notification icon to get notified when new videos go live. And until next time, cheerio.